Good evening. Continued reaction to the indictment of the former president, a one-on-one with former Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance, plus media coverage of the indictment. This media analyst is with us on that, plus the Tennessee three lawmakers who took to the floor of the legislature to protest gun violence. I'll speak to former Democratic Senator Doug Jones coming up. Joining me now to discuss the latest with the Trump indictment, as well as what we should make of the situation, is the former Manhattan District Attorney, Cyrus Vance Jr., who is with me now. Thanks so much for making the time.
Good afternoon, Wyatt. Glad to be with you.
So I want to start out, obviously, you preceded Alvin Bragg, the current Manhattan District Attorney, so a lot of people are turning to you, not just for your analysis and your perspective on the situation, but also with some of the logistical things that were happening behind it. And obviously, I appreciate there are limited things that you can tell us, given the nature of the job and given the nature of your position. But I guess I'm just curious, did you decline to move forward with this indictment, and then Alvin Bragg perhaps looked at it and revisited it? What happened in respect with that?
Wyatt, those are internal deliberations about our work in the office that I think need to remain confidential because they are spoken in confidence. But I think it's fair to say that, as I've said before, that we were looking at all these issues in 2019 timeframe, roughly. The federal prosecutors in Manhattan asked us to step back because they felt that they had the better laws and were on this, and I agreed with that. So that really is the first reason why we didn't move forward. As time passed, we were engaged in a much broader economic crimes investigation, and that was where we put our efforts going forward.
And I guess when you look at the significance of this, what type of a position do you think Alvin Bragg would be in order to have to make a decision of this nature? And I ask this because you hear a lot of people claiming that it's politicization and that Alvin Bragg is doing this because of political prosecution. So I guess I'm just wondering, what would your response be to people who are claiming that, and how much evidence is really necessary to make a decision to indict a former president, really something that is historic?
Well, we indicted the Trump Organization in the summer of 2021 and the CFO after a long battle that led us to the Supreme Court with the former president. So we were at odds with the former president directly for several years. And I think that in order to engage in that kind of litigation, particularly with the stakes that are attendant to investigating a person who was president at that time, then a former president, I think it's something that you need to be very thoughtful and professional about. It's easy to say, and people often say no man is above the law, but the president does stand in different shoes than the ordinary citizen, and that when one is president requires one as an investigator to be very thoughtful and deliberative and sure of the steps you're taking. And I would say the same thing applies to the decision of indicting a former president. Mr. Bragg is the only one who knows the full scope of his evidence. He has excellent lawyers within his office. The office has a tradition of taking on difficult cases and standing up to the criticism that inevitably follows taking on a big case. Partisanship is the easiest thing to decry. It was levied against me and us in our investigation, and the Supreme Court twice heard these arguments and made short work of them and found no politics in our decision making at all. So I think you need to make sure you're not operating on politics and you're not giving someone an opportunity to claim that. But it's a matter, I think, of just being very professional, very thorough, and if you think you're going in the right direction, then you need to stand up for your values and your work, and accept that you're going to be criticized.
And when looking at what could potentially come next with the various options that are at play as of right now, what are you expecting to come next in relation to this case? A lot of people believe that he could be indicted elsewhere as well, relating to other things. To what extent is that something you're looking for?
Well, clearly that appears to the observer reading the papers about ongoing investigations in Washington, D.C. regarding January 6th, investigations in terms of the former president's retention of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, the investigation in Georgia with regard to his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. These are matters which have weight, they have momentum, and I expect, I don't know, I expect they'll be resolved in the upcoming months. In the event those cases go forward, I think the Manhattan case will continue to go forward as well, but it will be part of a series of cases, and the underlying conduct of the Manhattan case is important and it's serious, but I think those other cases will attract significant attention because of sort of the weight of the issues that they represent. Violence in an attempt to overthrow the operation of Congress in selecting selecting the new president. Those are, no matter how you look at it, those are serious issues that Americans, I think, will care deeply about.
And just lastly, before we conclude, when we look at those various options that are at play right now, specifically with the Manhattan case where he's been indicted, he was arraigned, what are you expecting to come next in relation to the Manhattan case in particular? And what should people be expecting from your perspective, given the various legal battles that he finds himself in? What's next for the former president?
Well, some things are predictable, and this former president, as we've all seen, is also very unpredictable. I think we can predict the next period of time is going to be focusing on the Manhattan DA's office providing what's called discovery to Mr. Trump's lawyers. And that is essentially finding every document that bears upon this investigation and turning it over to his counsel. That's part of the obligation we have as prosecutors now in New York State to educate, inform, and provide the former president as a defendant the information that will enable his lawyers to understand the case and prepare a defense. There will be motions then filed by the former president's counsel. I think there will be motions to dismiss the case on legal grounds on the issues of whether or not federal preemption prevents the Manhattan DA's office from focusing on any illegal conduct in the federal election as a basis for elevating the false statements misdemeanors. And I think there may be an effort by Mr. Trump's lawyers to try to move in a parallel fashion in federal court in order to raise federal issues that can perhaps, in their view, either slow down or block the processing of the state case. So I think there's going to be a lot of legal maneuvering and strategy. This will not happen in blistering speed. It will be over the next several months. I think that Mr. Trump has excellent lawyers. The DA's office has excellent lawyers, and I think it's going to be a hotly contested and debated case, but with high quality legal representation on both sides.
All right, we'll leave it there. Former Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr. Thanks so much for making the time. Really appreciate it, and nice chatting with you.
Nice chatting with you, and thanks for your interest in the subject.
Well, as the indictment of the former president of the United States is obviously historic, the fact that no former president has ever been indicted, no president has ever been indicted. Also, another interesting aspect of it is the fact that people have never been able to react to this news in such wide terms with such wide accessibility. Joining me now to discuss what we should make of the entire situation is Aidan McClellan. He's with Mediaite. Thanks so much for making the time. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Let's just start out with the indictment of the former president and what the reaction has kind of been, not just from lawmakers, but as I mentioned, social media as an example, people have an increased ability to be able to share their perspectives to this. What has that reaction been like?
Well, I think the reaction to Donald Trump's indictment, which I think it's worth stepping back and remembering that not only is this a historic event for any president, we've never had a former president indicted, we're also talking about Donald Trump here, who commands this enormous and obsessive coverage from not only the media, but also social media. So it's worth looking through any sort of news about this former president as being news about Trump. And in that sense, we had pretty blanketed coverage of this on all of the cable news networks, the big three in the United States, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, covered the indictment itself and the actual day where Trump was traveling from Mar-a-Lago in Florida to New York to be arraigned, got pretty universal coverage, blanketed the airwaves. They had, cameras and helicopters following his car as it drove from Mar-a-Lago to the airport, then from Trump Tower in New York to the court in Lower Manhattan. So this got covered pretty exhaustively by news networks. It dominated social media, despite the fact that it's unclear that there's going to be any sort of real consequence for Donald Trump. I'm no lawyer, but from all the reporting on this, the charges against him are misdemeanors that the prosecutor in Manhattan is looking to turn into a felony. But I can't imagine that this case is one that Trump is particularly worried about compared to the other ones. So as far as just this having consequences for Trump in his 2024 campaign, I think that doesn't seem like it will be that consequential, particularly compared to these other cases he's facing. But still, the fact that a former president of the United States got criminally indicted in New York is a big deal, and it got covered like that.
And when you look at, you mentioned the media coverage and the fact that it did get pretty extensive coverage from all of the major news networks. Obviously, that is to be expected when a former president of the United States has been indicted. I guess, what are you expecting in regards to coverage, coming up shortly here, given that the indictment and more news surrounding the indictment may not come for a little while? I mean, he was just arraigned, but obviously there are a lot more options, as Cyrus Vance said when I just talked to him. There are obviously a lot more options at play.
Right. And Donald Trump's not supposed to be back in court in New York until December, which is obviously months away. I think now the eyes of the media are going to turn towards these other cases, the case being brought in Georgia against Trump for over his attempt to overturn the election there. There's also a number of other cases. There's the documents case down in Florida. So I think certainly those are going to be big stories to follow going forward, and they certainly pose a lot more legal peril from what we can tell to Donald Trump. So I'd expect those to take the attention of the media. But then again, Trump's going to be back in New York on this case in December. We've got the primary starting early 2024 for the 2024 presidential election. So Donald Trump, anyone who doesn't want to read about or watch news about Donald Trump for the next couple of years is going to have to either tune out completely or get over that, because Donald Trump is going to dominate news. Between his presidential run, where he looks poised to get the Republican nomination unless something really changes between him and Ron DeSantis, who's the closest challenger and potential candidate. And between these cases, there's going to be a lot of Donald Trump news coming up in the future. And I don't think that cable news networks, at least despite viewers complaining about CNN covering Trump so obsessively, I don't think cable news is going to be able to tune out of that, because it truly is newsworthy. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot more Donald Trump in the next 2 years, I'd say.
And just lastly, before we conclude, kind of a little bit different from the Trump indictment with some of the other issues that you've been covering extensively pertaining to Fox News, but not just Fox News. When you also look at other media outlets, for example, right now that have taken more of a partisan stance, a partisan nature, particularly on the right-wing side of the political spectrum, things like Newsmax, for example, that has quite interesting people working for them. You had Sean Spicer. I know he's not anymore, but they did, the former White House press secretary, amongst many others, some even, former, mainstream media, so to speak, news network anchors now working at this Newsmax organization or at Fox or what have you. What do you make of how, the more partisan networks have been covering an issue of this nature? And do you think that what they have been presenting per se is able to be perceived as, as credible as, say, CNN or one of the other major networks could be?
Right. Well, I think it's certainly the case that, at least when you look at the more fringe conservative networks like Newsmax and OAN, that certainly I would not call them anywhere near as credible as a major cable news network like CNN. Just for the fact that if you look at the way they covered the aftermath of the 2020 election, where they promoted Donald Trump's false and very obviously false claims that the election was stolen, I think that everyone should treat Newsmax and AON and the reporting that they do with an enormous grain of salt. Fox News is a little bit trickier because Fox News is a major cable news network. They have a news division that does very good reporting. They have bureaus around the world. Often their coverage is solid and good. I think what was revealed in these Dominion filings in this defamation case from the voting company against Fox News is that very often, at least in the aftermath of the 2020 election, Fox News did not air good reporting. And in fact, the judge in the case that is sending this to trial next Monday wrote that in his decision. He said that Fox News did not do good faith reporting. The network knew that the claims being made by Trump and his allies about the 2020 election were false. They still promoted those claims on air, and they did not reveal to their viewers evidence that debunked those claims. So I think that's a real problem for Fox News' credibility going forward. And we've also seen that Fox News is not yet willing to let go of their fealty to President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump. I think that's showcased by the fact that they've been defending him on this New York case in the last 2 weeks, which sort of makes sense because, you know, even fair-minded legal analysts and reporters are saying that this case does appear to be spectacularly thin. But it does show that Fox has truly not moved on from Donald Trump. And given the things that Fox, given the way that Donald Trump subjugates news networks that support him, I don't think that's a good thing for Fox News. And that means that it's not a good thing for the media in general.
A lot of news recently out of the state of Tennessee, where 3 lawmakers, now being referred to as the Tennessee Three, took to the floor of the Tennessee state legislature to protest calls for further action against gun violence amidst the tragic situation at the Covenant Christian School in Nashville, Tennessee. As a result, 2 out of 3 of them were expelled from the state legislature. One of them, Gloria Johnson from the state of Tennessee, was able to remain in her duties, but 2 of them, Justin Jones and Justin J. Pearson, will not be in the legislature. However, they are seeking to represent their communities again by being reinstated. Joining me now to discuss what we should make of the situation is Doug Jones. He is the former U.S. Senator from the state of Alabama with the Democratic Party. Thanks so much for making the time.
My pleasure. It's great to be with you again, Wyatt. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Let's just start out with a lot of what you're hearing from them, the representatives themselves. They are, claiming that it's politically motivated, etc. Do you think there should be any sort of consequences for doing what the Republicans argue was, kind of breaking the rules in protesting directly on the floor of the state legislature?
Yeah, but the only consequences you can do is the next time they have statewide elections and elections in the House for the House and state Senate, and that's vote them out. Get them out of there. I mean, you don't need somebody that is going to participate in such an assault on democracy. That should not be representative government that way. So there's no sanctions. There's nothing like that I think would be appropriate to do for just voting in such an autocratic way. But I do think this is going to be a big campaign issue in Tennessee. And I think it's going to be a big campaign issue elsewhere, particularly in the South, where legislatures have these supermajorities and can do whatever they want to.
And when looking at the situation in Tennessee right now, are you expecting that the 2 of them will be reinstated into the state legislature? And I guess one of the interesting logistical things is that they cannot be expelled for the same purpose once again. So what are you expecting on that front?
Yeah, it seems to me where this is headed right now is that they will be reinstated. As I understand it, it's a 2-step process to fill what is now a vacancy for those particular districts. The first step would be for the local government to appoint someone to fill that vacancy until a special election can be held. I expect that both of them will be appointed by their local governments, that they will run in the special election, and that they will win in the special election. And you're right, they can't be expelled again for the same conduct. We'll see how it goes forward. I think under Tennessee rules, if they get expelled again, they can never come back. But we'll see. But I expect them back in the legislature this week, quite frankly.
And when you look at the political response, the political reaction to this, I guess let's touch on a little bit of each side. You have the House Speaker in Tennessee, Cameron Sexton, who is obviously very much for expelling them. But you also have people, the likes of the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, expressing their support, their solidarity with these 3 representatives, with the Tennessee Three. I guess I'm just wondering what you make of the various support coming from different sides of the political spectrum.
Well, here's what's happening. What you're seeing is President Biden and folks on the Democratic side of the political aisle condemning this action vociferously. I mean, I did a tweet video about it the other day that got a lot of traction online. So many people are just absolutely appalled at what happened in the state of Tennessee and the assault on democracy. People that were simply standing up and speaking out for their views, perhaps violating a rule of decorum, got the equivalent of a legislative death penalty with removal. That is just unbelievable that actually happened in that Capitol. What's really interesting is that you really hadn't seen an awful lot of support for the actions of the Tennessee legislature from Republican leaders around the country. Everybody acknowledged that they broke a rule. Everybody sees that some things, but you haven't really seen a lot of support where people saying that these guys should have actually been expelled. They're not addressing the one big issue that's in the room, and that is the race issue, where the two people that were expelled were young black men, and the one that was not expelled was a white woman. So Republicans are not addressing that issue right now. But I think what you're going to be seeing is people connecting the dots between this and their local elections. The one thing I want to emphasize to the listeners here is the importance of state and local elections. We're seeing it play out in Tennessee. We're seeing it play out in Mississippi, where there's corruption, where there is just this autocratic rule. And in this country, we have this history of voting more in presidential races than we do in the state races. And we really ought to reverse that trend, because it's the state and local races where the rubber meets the road, and people either get things done or get things done to them. And that's what we're seeing play out. So I'm hoping folks will use this to really get out the vote in these state and local elections.
All right, we'll leave it there. That is Doug Jones, former Democratic senator from the state of Alabama. Thanks so much for making the time, as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt. It's great to see you. Thanks.